Welcome, everyone, to the March Inspiring Math Mind series. This is hosted by the California Math Council's Central section. And I'd just like to give a big thank you to all of our partners that help us identify wonderful speakers like Mr. Nick Lopez, who will be speaking to us this afternoon, and as well as helping us promote to other folks in their area about this series. So thank you for joining us. I know it is a Thursday, the third Thursday in March, after you've been teaching all day at 4 o'clock. So thank you for making this a priority and being with us this afternoon. I can only imagine that all the other things you could be doing on the third Thursday of March, and you've chosen to be here with us today. So thank you for that. We're really excited to be here. We're very lucky to be joined by Nick Lopez, math extraordinaire from the Central Valley, with some great things to share with us. So Nick, I'll just stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good, Cole. Appreciate that. As Cole shared, my name is Nick Lopez. I am a math specialist here in Central California, and I serve within a lot of different roles. But before I kind of do my introduction, I was just curious about you and your connection with mathematics. If you were to just use some words to describe your relationship with math over time, in the chat, if you could just kind of drop what words would you use to describe your relationship with mathematics as a student? What would your relationship be like now? And go ahead and populate the chat when you're ready. And as I'm starting to see the chat being populated, I think, right, oftentimes people believe that there's this linear relationship with math, and often we kind of see ourselves in those bottom two illustrations where it's complicated and a little messy. And I think it's important for us to recognize that when we are engaging with teachers and when we're engaging with colleagues, that not everyone's relationship with mathematics is as linear as anticipated. My personal connection with our relationship with math built over time. I was fortunate enough to have teachers that kind of saw something within me. But I hit some bumps when I was in middle school, and then again in high school, but fortunate enough to have teachers that were like, hey, you have some foundational understanding of math. I think you being my teacher's assistant would help. And so I got to experience math a couple of times through like the TA lens and as a student. And so I think that helped boost my confidence. I was sharing with people today that I was working with a group of third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers, and we used to have math help hotline, and so we would call each other and have group conversations, my friends and I, around math, which I don't know if that's typical of high school students, but that was my relationship with math in high school. So it was kind of always in this like collaborative, let's try to think through, but then also like having conversations with the teacher the following day of like, here's what we tried, and we talked about it over the phone, and I think that's also important to kind of the math community that we're trying to inspire, even for us today as colleagues. In connection to kind of who I am and what I do, I serve in a lot of different capacities, but just a little bit about me and where I'm from. The far left is my life in symbols, product of Central California, Kings Canyon Unified. So I was born and raised in Reedley, California. Did my undergrad at USC and then did my credential program through Fresno State. Heavily involved in the math world. Over time, I serve on the CMC State Board, have done some work with AXA, and have presented at NCSM and NCTM. In addition to that work, I am currently part of the Math and U authorship team, where I got to write the TE notes for grades 3rd through 8th grade. But really, the heart and soul of my work is with my current partnerships. I currently work for Tulare County Office of Ed as a staff development and curriculum specialist, and these schools are really where my heart lies, because these are the schools in which I get to learn through and lead mathematics work throughout Tulare County. And so in regards to today's intentions and the purpose of today's talk, I had really three things in mind. The first is, how do we design mathematics experiences that place rigor at the center? The second is making connections to our current California mathematics framework, and then talking a little bit about what the implications are for our district schools and classrooms as we move forward and try to bring the framework to fruition in our classrooms across the state. And so when I think about rigor at the heart of the mathematics classroom, I think about all of the buzzwords within education, and we've heard them time and time again: data-driven, social emotional learning, differentiation, AI, higher order thinking, PLC equity. There has been a lot of conversation of like, we need to pivot our strategy. But I think to me, these are only buzzwords if, right, we don't attach meaning to them. And the biggest buzzword we have in education a lot is rigor. We hear it time and time again, and I felt that it was necessary to design a talk and conversation around rigor and what we mean by that word, specifically within the mathematics classroom, because we hear this from administrators and we hear this from time and like the lesson must be more rigorous. We must increase the rigor of our assessments. Does this problem possess the necessary rigor for that grade level? But in reality, it's like, do we have a solid definition of what we mean by rigor? And are we clear with teachers and students what it means when math possesses rigor? And so when we think about our journey within Common Core, we had the three shifts, right? The focus of our major grade level content standards, coherence, are we able to see that link across grade levels? And then we had this definition of rigor, which means to pursue with equal intensity, conceptual understanding, problem-solving application, and procedural skill and fluency. And I think I remember a while back attending a talk where this visual was given, and the conversation was, if I were to think about in which order I would put these, which order would it be? Or if I were to rank these ideas 1 through 3, what would I put first? What would I place second and third? And so I think just some initial thoughts, if you could drop in the chat, how would you rank those? What would you put as 1, 2, and 3? And so I'll give you a little bit of time to kind of put that in there. A lot of great ideas starting to populate the chat. Cole, do you mind unmuting and sharing just kind of your thoughts a little bit on this idea?
Sure. I kind of was thinking like it depends on where I'm at in my sequence. It's kind of the priority for me because I typically beginning I usually focus more on the conceptual side or tie it to application, and then later on down the road connect it back to the procedural. But it's kind of like I don't see it this way. I see it as bigger circles at certain days depending on where I'm at in my sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think someone had mentioned within the chat too, like, right, if we shorten any one of those legs and pay attention to one more than the other, then we kind of have this lopsided stool. And we know that's important to have a balanced approach. And so a nice visual to this idea of rigor. In addition to that, right, it really does depend. It depends on where we are within the instructional sequence. It depends upon where students are within their learning progression within the standards, because I think that too, right, gives us an idea of where to build upon, whether I'm starting with an application lesson or a conceptual lesson based upon student experience within the concept. And so really important that we have this balanced approach to rigor. And so I think to me, when we think about planning our math time with purpose, that does require us to take into consideration those three aspects of rigor. And so often when I work with schools, a lot of our conversation is around these three ideas: routine, task, and closing. When I think about the essentials for a math block, any time that students are engaged with mathematics, I think about lesson design in this way. And the first, and being a little bit more specific, like, do we have a number sense routine that is supporting students where they are? Do we have a purpose, like, is there a purpose behind the task, and what element of rigor does the task address? And then lesson closure, and the way in which we wrap up a lesson is important. And always wrapping up a lesson doesn't mean talking necessarily about the right answer, but more so about strategy, having students reflect upon what made them successful today, allowing students to compare and connect representations. And so I think to me, when we think about how can we be a little bit more clear with what we would hope to see within classrooms, this has been a nice way for myself and my teams to anchor around when it comes to planning with having rigor in mind. So I always share this graphic when I talk about number sense because I have a really bad habit. I step on the scale every morning, and sometimes I don't do anything the day before to change that number, hoping that number would change. And I feel like we do the same thing with number sense. It's something that like we complain about, but we don't intentionally ever plan on how to address the number sense problem. And so I think to me, when supporting schools and school districts, this is one of the things that's always on the forefront of my mind when it comes to just number sense in general. The nice part about our framework is that we have an operational definition now for number sense, which I also think is important because when I work with teachers and administrators, the conversation often starts to swirl around number sense. And I think with any word that we use, are we able to define it? And so when we say a student lacks number sense, what does that specifically mean? And what are we putting into play so that way we're strategically approaching the number sense challenge that students are having? And so when I think about routines, I see routines serving one of three purposes. Either A, it gives me an opportunity to spiral ideas that were previously taught. It gives me opportunity to support and strengthen understanding of current concepts that kids are exploring. Or it allows me to anticipate and I can plant the seed of, oh, I'm not in fractions yet, but I could do some fraction work so that way students have the confidence with fraction ideas before we get to that concept. And so the framework highlights kind of what number sense activities students should frequently engage in, kind of in this bird's eye view. And so what I have been trying to do is identify some high leverage number sense routines to support within the classroom. And so often when we do lesson labs or lesson study, like this is one of the things that comes to the forefront of like what number sense routine are we going to engage the students with so that way we're able to understand and lean into some of their current understanding of mathematical ideas. And so I think we're going to do a little bit of math together, but it's always important for us to have some norms. So just take a look at these 5 norms and we'll just think about them number 1 through 5 and which norm is connecting with you at the moment and just drop that in the chat. So we'll say errors are gifts is number 1 and multiple strategies is number 5. So what strategy or what norm is connecting with you right now? All right, so now that we've grounded ourselves in some norms, we're going to go ahead and engage with the first high leverage number sense routine, which is incredible equations. Using this structure within classrooms, often I will introduce incredible equations this way. So I'll give kids 4 different equations, and then I have them talk about like what do they see that's similar or different amongst the 5 or those 4 equations there. So what just kind of thinking through a kid lens, what might we hear students say? What are things that are similar? What are things that are different? And feel free to populate the chat. Yep, they all have a question mark. I'll definitely get that. They all equal 5. Yeah, I've definitely received that one most recently, Annie, the 2. There's a 2 in each of them, and then we talk about, what does a 2 mean in each of those equations, which allows me to dig a little deeper as far as their understanding. And so oftentimes it's landing on, right, they all equal 5. And so what I'd like for us to do now, just in the chat, is think about different ways to make the number 6. And we'll kind of have you populate the chat, different ways to make 6. We could do the whole waterfall thing, which is we'll go ahead and type the equations within and give ourselves about a minute to think. So go ahead and just go ahead and press enter if you haven't done so already. Let's see the different ways in which people thought about the number 6. Very cool. So in the classroom, when I've done this structure, I've allowed kids to generate their lists, then compare their list with a partner, and then they star the ones that they have that are the same. and then they count the ones that are different. And the goal would be to improve over time the number that they have different than their friends, because often, right, kids will kind of go into some basic computation, but the goal would be to stretch them over time. And so today I got to do this with sixth grade students in Munson Sultana. And so this is what fifth graders thought about the number six and the different ways to play with the number six. So it really allows for some good formative assessment. What are ways in which kids think about a number, the way that we can compose, decompose, play with fractions, play with decimals, a way to play with fluency a little bit more creatively, and allow to gamify the idea. And so another way that I've seen this used as well is the teacher creates a chart, circle map in the center, and then this becomes the poster to record like students sharing their ideas. And then I think too, I've seen teachers at the end of the day draw a stick, and this kind of gets sent home with a kid for homeschool communication, as far as here's kind of what math was today, and then kind of sharing like that was the that was the equation that I contributed to the class conversation. So really high leverage and low prep allows for kids to play with number more exploratively. Another structure that has been fun has been how much or how many, which leans into quick images, right? So we show a series of dots really quickly, and then we make them disappear. And we have the kids talk about like, well, how many do we think there were? Sometimes I'll give them like 3 seconds, and then they disappear. And so in the chat, how many dots do you think there were? What would be your estimate based upon what you saw? Right. So the quick image kind of creates this necessity for kids to be like, I wonder how many there were. So when we revisit the image again, it allows for us to think about groupatizing. So thinking through like, how am I going to group these dots instead of counting them individually, which then links to a structure that at CMC Central, not this past one, but the one before, Berkeley Everett, he had introduced a routine called How Much. Same idea, but thinking about how much is being represented in this visual, and then thinking, how would you kind of write that as an expression? So think about how you would calculate that, and then how would you represent that mathematically? And when you have a total and how you would represent that mathematically, go ahead and drop that into the chat. Right, so we can see the various ways in which we are all kind of calculating the total quantity that is there, and then giving some meaning to those abstract representations that we have within the chat. Another thing that we could do is highlight for kids, like, where do we see all of these elements represented? So if this is the expression that I'm trying to discuss, like, where do we see that within the picture? And then allowing kids to create their own is an extension activity connected to this idea. Yeah, and then opportunities to see connections and matching from the way in which we thought about it and kind of what was demonstrated. And so, right, oftentimes introducing it with whole numbers, but we could easily do this with fractions and with decimals as well. Number strings is another one that we know that kind of we lean into, but intentionality behind and purpose behind a number talk or number string. And so in this number string, the goal is to make 10. And so which two numbers are compatible to make 10? And once kids recognize that 7 and 3 makes 10 in this string, in this sequence, or in this expression, which would be helpful to make my 10 in this situation, which numbers would be compatible to make something pretty friendly, and then extending that to decimal work. So often it's right building confidence with students through a whole number, and then how can they apply and extend to decimal situations. Another routine that leans heavily more so into the math practices, but supports students in talking about mathematics as same but different. So here's two different graphs, two different equations, what's similar, what's different, allowing kids to engage with the standards for math practice, but also addressing some um, ideas around graphing and attending to some fluency as well. And then the last is kind of these Solve Me mobiles. They've been around for a while, but a really fun way to get kids to explore these relationships between quantities using visual representation. And so knowing that, right, there's a lot of math that's hidden within here and the amount of access that's provided to students via this structure and routine. And so what's nice through the framework is that they have highlighted some important number sense activities across the grade levels. And you'll notice that Math Talks makes its way across the entire TK-12 continuum. So if there's work that we could collectively do, that's also important to highlight. In addition, you'll see number path and number line activities. So if that's something that we haven't leaned into as a school or a district, thinking what number line activities we could connect kids with. And then the other is estimation. Estimation is a tool that we know is super valuable, but oftentimes gets proceduralized. So how do we zoom out a little bit so that way students are seeing estimation as a tool and not just that one lesson in chapter 3 that gets proceduralized time and time again. And um, connecting back to daily essentials around the math blocking, conceptual understanding, and application. Just thinking through when we are looking for curriculum, how are we tapping into previous learning and creating experiences that acknowledge that students come to the table with some understanding and with some knowledge to be able to extend their learning. And so oftentimes it's helpful to ground students within context, to think through the mathematics that they're engaging with, because context helps so much. And based upon the context, often what I'll do with kids, engage them using the 3 reads protocol. So having them take a look at the story, reading it to themselves, because I know oftentimes as math teachers, we get an autopilot and I need to read the problem to you so we can hurry up and get to the math. But in reality, I need to create space for students to make sense of the math first. So I'll usually have them read the problem to themselves, and then I make the problem disappear. Or I have them close their book and we discuss what they remember. Because time and time again, there's been plenty of times we go into class and we ask kids, well, what the problem is about, and they'll just reread the whole problem to us verbatim. And in reality, it's like, no, I need you to put it within your own words. And so having them close their book, discuss what they remember, and then having them return to the problem and see, oh, did I remember all of the things that were within the problem? The second read is always focusing in on the quantities. So what quantities are there? What do they represent? And why are they important to the problem? And then that final read typically happens when the kid is solving the problem independently or collaboratively and having that discussion around the mathematics. Which then I think to me, it's like, how do we take context and turn it into visuals? How do we take those visuals and turn them into variables? So that way students are able to see this journey and make connections between those representations. And so I think the other thing too is how we engage kids with the math matters. And so I'm going to give us a little bit of time just to talk about this visual via the chat. What do you notice? What do you wonder about this piece of data? Yeah, so some good wonderings already in the chat. What's the best deal? Why do the tokens go down in price? How much can I afford? Yeah, all real world things that we would want kids to think about. And I think it's important for us to create conditions where kids are engaging in understanding, and definitely agree with what's being dropped in the chat around the tamale problem. Yeah, tamales aren't 150 anymore. And really leaning into the visual, allowing kids to generate some questions, allowing them to notice and wonder, we know is an asset-based approach to instruction. Kids have mathematical ideas, and how are we creating those opportunities for them to, said verbalize so that way we can recognize the brilliance that they bring. And all of that's done, right, before we actually engage with the problem or within the question that is being asked, so that way students can see some connections between what they thought, right, the question could be or might be, to what is actually being asked via the curriculum. The other is, again, leaning into visuals when things are presented to kids as a puzzle to solve. Really, really important for us to kind of think through, like, how can I use what I know to unpack what's already there for me visually? Um, in addition, how can I lean into visual representations to be able to play with math? And as we are looking at problems, then having conversation with my teammates, like when I'm looking at these problems, what aspect of rigor are we addressing? Which is also a good conversation for teams to have as they're engaging in mathematics overall. And we know that through these multi-representations of mathematical ideas, the more connections that students have between manipulative models, real situations, oral language, written symbols, and pictures, the stronger the understanding students have when it comes to mathematical ideas. And so I'm going to pause for us just a second and think about just all of the math that we engaged with so far. That's a QR code that'll take you to this student actions guide. And I just want us to reflect really quickly on like what standards for math practice did we engage with thus far today. And then as people are looking at the standards for math practice, I'm sure I probably brought up a lot of things, Cole, that you have maybe some thoughts and ideas around. So I'm curious, just with what I've shared thus far, kind of what's sticking or resonating with you.
I definitely like your focus of having to continuously go back kind of around this circle of rigor, the different areas that you're talking about, and how you can see each of them at different times. Even through the tamale problem, you were talking about some of the conceptual while getting them to what will eventually be more procedural right down the road.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, no, it's interesting, good reminders, I think, to kind of sit back and watch them and they're like, oh yeah, I have seen those things before, especially like the mobiles, the little puzzle, the little
Mhm.
puzzles.
Yeah.
Um, so good fun. I've wasted or not wasted. I've spent a lot of time invested in those things in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, and this Standards for Mathematical Practice tool has been helpful for myself and for the districts that I've been working with as far as what student actions are we hoping to see within classrooms attached to each of the Standards for Math Practice. The one that I lean into a lot is SMP 1, and really the first one, discuss the meaning of the problem with classmates. Oftentimes, like I said, we kind of fall under this pressure of time, and we tend to overlook that that is probably one of the most important parts, that we need to create those opportunities for kids to make meaning of the mathematics during instructional time. Otherwise, the only time that they are operating independently is during assessment. And so thinking about how frequently we have kids talk about math and make meaning of the problem with their classmates is super important during instructional time because that allows for us to support and understand and gain some form of assessment as to what their takeaways are in regards to the mathematics. We've also used this tool as a reflection tool when working with schools and working with teachers to have them reflect, like what standards for math practice am I doing most frequently, and which ones am I not doing frequently. So I think it's also important for us to reflect upon that. Um, and then the other thing too it's been a great calibration tool for me to use with administrators as far as providing classroom feedback. These are the habits that I've seen students engage in, and then does give an opportunity to offer up suggestions on some intentional feedback centered around the standards for math practice. And right, it spans all grade levels, and so we know that also is key to set our learning and growth as a school district and as professionals. In addition, connecting to our English language development standards. A lot of what we do on the facilitation end, having in back of mind of how are students going to engage within mathematics through the lens of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so as we think about planning our math time, the SMPs and the ELD standards really do live well alongside each other. And how can we plan with intentionality so that way we are attaching meaning making and co-constructing ideas with kids in the mathematics classroom. And so I'm going to take a minute for us just to pause and reflect. And if you could just drop in the chat, just one key takeaway from our talk thus far and any wonderings that you currently have.
You left him speechless, Nick. While we're waiting for some responses, I have a wonder for you on that the little checkbox thing that was on the last page with the SMPs.
Yeah.
Is that something that like leaders would be using as they're kind of going through walkthroughs, or teachers are doing with each other, or students are doing like how do you use that?
Yeah, I've used it in both settings. So it's a calibration tool with teachers and leaders. And so even during our lesson labs, that's kind of a reflection tool that we use, like what standards for math practice did we have the students engage with. But then, yeah, it's providing common language between teachers and administrators around the math practices. And so that has been super helpful. In some of the districts I support, I have an admin math chat. So I meet with the administrators because sometimes they're not able to attend professional development. And so within their structure, I meet with them once a trimester. And during that, we talk about like, we either watch a video clip and then we talk about the standards for math practice that they saw present, or I use that as a learning walk tool when I am calibrating with administrators to say like, hey, what math practices did we see in play? So that way, right, it's an asset-based approach to how we are giving feedback to the classroom.
That's very good. Thank you.
All right, so really, really good responses, and I appreciate your reflections within the chat. I think as far as closing and next steps, the first is just as we think about our shift and the hope of seeing change within the mathematics classroom, we know that we need to be taking an asset-based approach to instruction. Students come to the table with a wealth of knowledge, and so the idea would be how often are we designing so that way we're able to highlight and leverage student thinking. In addition, how are we creating active engagement through investigation and connection so the problems that we put in front of students matter? And always asking ourselves as we're planning for math time, what, how can I get kids curious about the topic that we're going to engage with? And then the third is cultural and personal relevance. How am I allowing for kids to see that math lives beyond the classroom and that they themselves are doers of math? And so, and that happens through intentional design, through the problems that we select to put in front of students and the questions that we ask. Often it is hard when we are, again, under the confines of time to create the space to be able to listen in to kids and listen into student thinking. Because right when we're listening for right answers instead of listening to student thinking, we overlook the brilliance that kids bring to the table. In addition, I think it's really important for us as educators to create learning spaces where we are listening alongside and leaning into student thinking. So whether that be lesson labs, whether that be co-teaching or working alongside a fellow teacher, and some of this work is already happening, and I want to recognize that as well. In addition, how are we making math playful? How are you recognizing what kids bring to the table through different structures, whether that be counting collections, them engaging in shape sorts, or even through games? There's a lot of math that's hidden within there, and us recognizing that that's an important aspect. So as we're thinking about, and probably right now, designing our summer schools could really have a lot of great opportunities for some math enrichment and a great opportunity for us to play and experiment with ideas as we get ourselves ready for the following school year. And the last thing that I'll share is that really as we're thinking about system and systems change, that it requires implementation support by all. That if we are anticipating and hoping for changes within our classroom, that there needs to be support for teams, there needs to be support for school districts and for the school building as a whole. And so thinking through what professional learning structures do we have, what robust professional learning ecosystem can we put into place that support content understanding and math supports within all areas of our district. And then I think the last is we're linked in a lot of different ways. And so recognizing that, right, my school district can provide professional learning, but also I myself can create my own professional learning networks. And so just thinking through what resources are available to us as teachers. So I said our monthly webinars here with CMC. In addition, what does NCSM, NCTM have to offer when it comes to professional learning, our CMC conferences, and then also if you're on X or on Blue Sky, just thinking of ways that we can connect and follow. So just making sure that we ourselves network as educators to continue to learn and grow from one another. And so if you want access to the slides, that QR code and that bit.ly link will get you access. I thank you and appreciate you for attending this afternoon. And I hope that you had a takeaway from today's learning.
So thank you. Let's give Nick some love in the chat, and I see it's coming through already. So thank you, Nick, for being here and sharing your time with us and your knowledge with us. So Nick alluded to it, but I want to just remind you that we are back here the third Thursday of April. So every third Thursday, 4 to 5 p.m. So if you have a buddy, I encourage you all to bring a friend next in April. We're in the midst of the spring. There's like that October slope where we all are really kind of like, whoa, we're going to make it to breaks. And now we're about ready to experience that as well, because spring break is so late this year for so many of our California schools. So bring a friend, have some fun the third Thursday in April. And here's the information to be able to register. And then just a reminder that if you'd like to get more of this type of content, Duane, Scott, and I host our podcast, Math on the Rocks. We've had a lot of special guests on our episode. Nick, we're going to have to get you on there one time here pretty soon to talk about some of the rocky topics in California mathematics. So please make sure you follow us, listen to us on either Apple Music, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you find your podcast at. And with that, just a big thank you. Thank you for giving us your time after a long day of work. Some of you from the East Coast, so after a long day of work and probably dinner. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great rest of your day.